I would just like to know which scene was the biggest pain in the butt of the film. In the butt. Which scene was the worst film?
There were two scenes off the top of my head, and by the way, in 30 years, no one has asked me that question. They've asked me every other question. The two scenes that were the most difficult, physically taxing difficult, CD Alpha 5 was a nightmare, the sand planet. We all had to wear all this protective gear. There were airplane engines blowing that stuff around. We don't understand this. Anyway, thank you. I thought they were giving me a hint. Everybody came out of that thing with sand all over the place. The other thing that was very difficult to film and very unsatisfying in the finished movie, it's one of the only things I really regret. You know, when a director looks at the movie that he's made, he's really looking at home movies of his life. All you can see is the things you did wrong. I once heard David Lean talking about the bridge on the River Kwai, and somebody said, well, I love the last moment when the doctor says madness, madness, and walks away. David Lean said, I hate that moment. Why did he hate that moment? Because after he shot the close-up of James Donald saying madness, madness, the producer, Sam Spiegel, immediately put him on a plane back to London, and it's a double that walks away. And David Lean didn't like the way the guy swung his arms. Crazy. Well, for me, as you may know, the first Star Trek movie, 1979, was a famous runaway production, $45 million back then, and was a major scandal at the time. This movie cost about $11.2, and mainly I didn't mind, but the Genesis Cave was a big disappointment to me. It was done on the cheap to me. It's not a satisfying moment in the movie. And even as I was filming it, I knew that I wasn't going to be happy. It's overcome, I think, and I'm not the best judge of any of this, I'm one more opinion, but my impression is that if the story is really good, and if the characters are really compelling and well acted, and the damn thing is in focus, then a lot of other things kind of go by the boards. That's a borderline moment for me. I think you're involved in the movie, so you go with it, but that bothered me, and it bothered me at the time. Those were the two things that were rough to film.
Yes, sir. In addition to Star Trek, which of course has Moby Dick running through it, a very big thing, you've also done in Time After Time an exploration of two very famous, one real character, Sigmund Freud, and one fictional character, Sherlock Holmes. So, with an obvious love of advice, if someone handed you a blank check for however many millions of dollars, is there a classic story you'd love to tackle as a writer-director?
I had an odd experience a number of years ago where I got a chance to write The Odyssey. And I was supposed to direct it over 2 nights at HBO. Francis Coppola was producing, I was writing, directing, and a man named Robert Holme was involved. And it came at a very sad time in my life, because my wife had just died of breast cancer, age 36. And I really didn't know if I could put one foot in front of one another, let alone one word in front of one another. But The Odyssey, which in my opinion is the best story, I had known as my bedtime story from the time I was a child. And it was perhaps the easiest thing I ever wrote. It was basically the story of a man trying to get back to his wife. I was writing my autobiography. It was also the story of a man who was unable to distinguish the difference between cleverness and wisdom, and who paid heavily for that inability. And I wrote it, and then I realized I had a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old child, that my directing career was essentially over. I was just going to raise them, which I did, and they're both of them out of jail. So I wrote it. I consider it one of the best things I ever wrote. When I said I couldn't direct it, HBO was no longer interested. They had been thrilled. And Robert Halmy took it over. He took it to NBC. And he hired a man named Andrei Konchalovsky, Russian director whose chief claim to fame seems to be that his father wrote the Russian national anthem, not the Internationale of Clementon. And Andrei Konchalovsky's first decision was to throw out the screenplay and write his own version, The Odyssey according to Danielle Steele. So I suppose the long answer, all my answers are long. The long answer is that if I had a lot of money and could do it, I would do my version of the Odyssey. Incidentally, if you want to read it, I put it online. You'll just go Nicholas Meyer Odyssey, you'll find it. It's probably kind of messy because it was back in the early days of something. But you can. I was so pissed off that I just said, I'm putting this online and anybody can read my handiwork. And it starts off with a tremendous storm at sea, and the title is you see a man on a raft and this towering waves. And the title, this is the story of a man who wanted to go home. It's a good one. All right.
Mr. Whitney, Nick, I wanted to ask you about the motion picture score. I've always loved music, and this is just fantastic. Give us your thoughts a little bit on some of the ideas you had, either your ideas or the people you talked with.
The question is, I think your mic isn't working, so I'm going to repeat the question. You're asking me to discuss the music from the film?
Right.
Okay. Well, a couple of things. One is that my background is my family background, I should say, is a background in music. My grandfather was in the Boston Symphony for 25 years. My mother was a concert pianist. My father was a doctor. He was a very, very fine amateur pianist. Took the place of violin. It goes on like that. So I grew up in a household filled with music. And I was always very intrigued by music for films. One of the things that people may have noticed is that sound always dominates picture. If you don't believe me, go out in your car, put something on the radio, and watch the landscape. And you will see that the landscape is colored by the music that accompanies it. You can show me an image of a child joyously bounding through a field of marigolds, and if you put Chopin's funeral march underneath it, that child will die of an incurable disease. So I amassed a very large collection of film music and have a lot of time to think about what this does. I think scoring for a film is a little bit like scoring for a ballet after the choreography has already been put in place. There was no way on this movie, at the prices that we were working, that I could afford Jerry Goldsmith, who had done the first Star Trek, or anyone of that caliber. So, and I'm a firm believer, by the way, that art thrives on restrictions. That when you can't throw money at a problem, you are obliged to become inventive. In Henry V, the chorus says, "On your imaginary forces work." Think when we speak of horses, as you see them, planting their proud hoofs in the receiving earth. It is your thoughts that now must deck our kings, carry them, jumping more times, etc., etc. And the idea of finding another composer, a new composer, was really intriguing to me. And I started listening to a lot of demo tapes, which was a pretty discouraging exercise because I found, I get it. I found that a lot of it sounded the same. And in addition to underlining or emphasizing the action on the screen, or even contradicting the action on screen, because characters could be saying, I love you, and the music could be telling you something vastly different underneath. But in addition to all the potentiality of what music can do for a film, there's another one, and that is that music can be the voice of the film. The most famous example that comes to mind, I don't know how many people here have ever seen The Third Man, Carol Reed's film. Oh dear. We'll all see that tonight. That's one of the great movies on Netflix. And the entire movie is scored with the use of a zither. And the moment you hear the music, you will know that you've known it all your life. You just didn't know where it came from. And it definitely defined that movie, The Third Man, which is Orson Welles and Joseph Cotten. What I was looking for was not only a composer who knew how to write music, but also somebody who could be the voice of this film. And finally, after hearing a lot of music that sounded very generically alike to me, I listened to a tape, it was a tape back then, from a man named James Horner that intrigued me, and I called him in and had a conversation with him. Most directors find it difficult to talk to composers because they are speaking different languages, and the director is at the mercy of the composer a little bit. That was not quite my case. So I was able to talk to him, and I said, listen, this is a movie, as far as I was concerned, never mind what you or anybody else has since made of it. This is a movie about the Navy. I want a score that sounds like the ocean. If you know Debussy, Meyer, that's what I want. And that's what I think he gave me. Now, I hope a reasonable answer to your question.